Hey folks, Steve here with another NATO The Cold War Goes Hot video for you today. This should be, I hope, the video that covers turns 8 through 14, or at least until we reach a actual ending point in our strategic surprise campaign. Um, we're over halfway through. Things are contentious. I fear we could see another Warsaw Pact defeat, which it is only a disappointment because I was hoping to do much better. Having learned a lot of lessons, really, is both sides in the playthrough so far, and I think what I'm realizing um, is there are some strategic level mistakes that I have made as the Warsaw Pact that I can only properly understand at this point in the game. And I'll talk very briefly about this here as sort of the introduction for this video. This is backed up by my own considerations, but then I finally decided to look around on Board Game Geek to see, what other folks' experiences have been. And I am learning that indeed, at least for the strategic surprise scenario, um, the Warsaw Pact trying to win on points is not the way to go. Now, I was starting to see that as I've played through the War of Nerves in this scenario because there's just not enough Warsaw Pact units on the board to kind of have a broad front advance and pick up a lot of points and like consistently take the time to do cleanup operations against maybe those units that are hanging out inside of a city, and threatening your supply lines, that sort of thing. Like every time we've played basically the strategic surprise, if not worse, in the War of Nerves, we just didn't have enough units. Like I needed every unit in the front lines doing its thing. You can get the victory points for a city by bypassing it and putting it out of supply. The problem is if there's a NATO unit in there, they can always try to spring out even with being out of movement supply and do something to be a problem. And so you kind of have to take a diligent approach. We also don't have enough units on the board to guard all of our flanks as well as I would like. And so we can't, make progress everywhere. We're tending to make progress in very specific sectors. Now, in an extended build-up scenario, which we've not done, and I probably won't get to before I move on from this game to play other stuff, not to say that that wouldn't be a fun time. I think it actually would be a huge amount of fun. Um, the there's more units, right? I mean, there's more units for both sides, but to look at what we're leaving at the table here in my counter tray, like there's a fair number of other units that we've not seen in the game, and there's a whole front here, which is the what is this, BEF front? Um, or I'm sorry, 51st Guards, and then yeah, there's at least two or three other formations in the counter tray that, if you look at the map, well, two to three is exactly what we would need to back up our situation. We'd have a front or two, here. The Polish front would actually be more of a true strategic reserve or a extra compounding force, and we'd probably have an additional front up there at Denmark, and so we could advance across the map more consistently because we would have just more units on the board. Now, likewise, NATO would too. And just to show, you got to watch because some of these are the Orange Band 89 units, which we're not using. There's a fair number of other units here as well that would potentially come in or be present, but I think the Warsaw Pact may gain more units on a unit to unit basis in extended build up, and that's where the point victory is maybe more realistic because you're maybe more consistently grabbing territory, assuming you're making advances. What the consensus seems to be in the forum on Board Game Geek and just folks' experience is in strategic surprise. And again, I think that the player notes do align with this. So if I guess I didn't make this more important in my planning. From the outset, a strategic surprise scenario has to be about crossing the Rhine for automatic victory as the Warsaw Pact. And likewise, as NATO, you're trying to stop that, or if you're getting fortunate getting the two cities in a Warsaw Pact country, automatic NATO victory. So the strategic surprise starts to become more about automatic victory than maybe the extended buildup scenario would be. Maybe that's still something you would want to achieve an extended buildup, but you have more maybe options or more paths to victory because you've got more units to use. Here, you are on just the most brittle force composition as the Warsaw Pact that from turn one, it would have been better maybe, because I kind of had this broad front strategy of like, well, let's make progress where we can and we'll opportunistically find our big breakthrough and we'll go and do that. Um, Instead, what I probably should have done is just picked an area of focus and then just dumped everything I could into it by chucking the Warsaw Pact units, like the fronts where they are, but then send the Polish front as quickly as we could, to compound, that area of operations. Maybe we kind of have done that right here, but it wasn't as intentional as if I said from the get go, we're gonna we're gonna smash through right there, and that's gonna be our path to victory. We are kind of seeing the semi coordination, not real coordination, mind you, but just the hey, Southeast German front is attacking up here, Czechoslovakian front attacking down here. We're sort of both converging. That is the kind of thing you want to be doing. So I'm not. I guess I'll say I'm like 80% of the strategy I should have been leaning into. So that's not bad, 80%. But if I had just said turn one straight up, this is how we're going to do it. This is the game plan. We might fail in doing it, but all effort is going to go to that, and that could have been achieved a bit differently. I could have focused a bit differently and tried to make it work. The only problem is like the British here being a threat to the mid sector exists no matter what I do in a strategic surprise scenario. So I don't feel like it's just so tricky. Now I've seen recommendations that you start chemical warfare on turn one, and I think that makes a lot more sense than the way I've done it, where it was like, hey, we don't want to use it because we're worried about victory points. But if you accept that in a strategic surprise scenario, you're not going to win on points at all, then you absolutely should start chemical strikes on turn one. You don't care that that's going to give the NATO 14 victory points because you're never going to get 30 or 35 victory points for the win. Your path to victory is only through automatic victory by crossing the Rhine. If you accept that as your reality, which I have not, so this is like the big, a big part of the 20% that I'm missing here. If you just say, okay, that is the only way we're going to win is crossing the Rhine, and maybe the game should be maybe more explicit about this. This could be, and maybe the one knock is like, okay, you learn this by playing the game, but now you're many hours in your playthrough, especially if you're playing with a friend, and like you realize like, okay, this is just not going to work. You got to re-rack the game. Well, that's maybe time wasted. If the game itself kind of told you straight up, like strategic surprise, the only real path to victory is automatic victory. Like I think that would help a lot of folks. So maybe that's my lesson to you, and I'll bring this up in the review when I get to it. But that would be the, I think that is a really big factor to this scenario. Like just saying, okay, and then this would modulate your experience playing the War of Nerves. If you were exiting the War of Nerves peace turns, looking at the map and going, okay, this is clearly looking like something from a strategic surprise, then you know you're going to have to go for an automatic victory. You're going to have to start chemical strikes on turn one and just go for it. That is different than probably extended build up. So knowing that, right? So we're halfway through this campaign. I'm going to continue to play until it reaches a conclusion. But having now gained this, additional information and comparing my experience with others, that so far my experience has been somewhat similar. And the conclusion has been you got to go for, automatic victory. If you do that and you do that knowing that's your path from turn one, and you add in all those considerations, um, then the Warsaw Pact victory is much more achievable in this scenario, and folks have done it. It's just I'm slow to catch all the nuances here. So things that could have been done better is, if you really think about it, I've been using my air very broadly, right? I'm using it on these broad fronts. Okay, that's fine. But if I had said, listen, I'm going to do nothing with my air points but focus on my critical sector, and let's say that's Fulda Gap right here. Well, I would be using my 6 to 8, air points on a good die roll, or six to seven, in this one sector, not spread it out, focus, and do that to get as many step losses on the airstrike die rolls as I can generate, which would quickly, or more quickly, thin out a front than just trying to make little progress in different areas. Um, and it would also disrupt a lot more units, so the Allied counterattacks, when and where they would happen, would be less less good, we'll say. Granted, the sequence of play doesn't necessarily help us a whole lot, with that, given that the recovery phase is before their attacks. But for NATO, so if we struck everybody and they all got disrupted, that disruption would go away by the time they got to their combat phase. But it might mean if we struck way back here, within five hexes of an in supply unit, and we struck these guys, they may not be able to join up on the counterattack. And so I think this feels a little bit like Wargaming 101, and I should feel a little ashamed that, like, I would not have just instinctually said, I'm going to concentrate all of my air power in this one sector and we're going to blow away the enemy. I just have not done that. I think I'm going to start doing that. The consequence, though, that I'll need to keep in mind is, for every airstrike that I do here, that's airstrikes I'm not maybe doing elsewhere, and that gives kind of the free opportunity, because you have a sort of limitation on how and where you do your airstrikes, as reactive defensive airstriking as NATO. This is going to shift some of those air points for NATO to using it offensively, and I've tended to have to use the NATO airstrikes defensively all the time. Well, if we're going to cluster the airstrikes, the NATO player can do that too. So it's a gamble, but this is how we're going to chip our way through these multi-step French units. Some of these other German units kind of get into this clear terrain, and move forward. So I think what I want to do. This is just frustrating because it kind of feels too late in so many ways. We're going to try to do that. We're going to try to focus on a very particular sector. We're going to try to burn our way, chip our way through the remaining Americans, French, and West Germans in this sector if we can. And we're going for the Rhine. That's our main objective. That's what we're going to do. If I were doing this earlier in the game, I would have been using, and this was a strategy I read about on Board Game Geek, so maybe I wouldn't have thought to do it, using some of the paratrooper units deep in the backfield, if we can get there, doing airdrops, not helicopter movement, or some, I guess, some combination of that, getting units behind the main line to seize control of these reinforcement points and basically keep them from coming in at all, which would actually have probably helped the Warsaw Pact cause quite a bit. attacking or seizing the reforger sites, and I just didn't. I was so focused on defeating the enemy up front that I kind of gave away that possibility. And I'm wondering, how well that would go if we had tried it, but that's a missed opportunity, and we're seeing the benefits of NATO getting all of those reinforcements. So again, another lesson learned. I'd have to look at, for those paratroopers, like, okay, they're operating probably, after you drop them, they're going to be out of movement supply, out of combat supply, if they have to fight anything or do anything, kinetic, which means they don't stick around very long, or you got to extract them. But you could send them on, sort of special operation force missions to do these things way in the backfield and maybe get them back home via extraction. So with helicopter movement or something like that. So there's definitely some things that we didn't try to do that maybe would have been worthwhile. So anyway, 16-minute intro, guys, but I think this is a really good time and a good use of some of the video time to actually talk about the way this game is working and kind of the big conclusions that are coming out of the game experience. Um, so I'm failing in certain respects, learning the system, learning the strategies. I'll defend myself by saying, well, hey, this is a different game. It's using its own set of rules. I kind of have to learn the way things operate together. And this should not be construed as any, real knock against the game that I'm having trouble figuring out the strategies. I think that's part of the game. I'm genuinely pretty pleased with the game as the way it functions. The asymmetry is really interesting. It's a hoot of a game in real terms, and it's not, for having a big, large rule book at the table. It actually plays really cleanly, and the rules just help as they're almost written as a good reference, so you can really hop, double check something if you need to. But once you're rolling, you know how things work, and you can just sort of play through, which I think is really interesting, and a good rule book, I would say. So okay, guys, I'm gonna go play through turn 8. Turn 8. The other thing I'm just going to mention, this is already way too long, I got to start worrying about HQs now. So, how does this work? The quickest way to say it is every turn, the Warsaw Pact player has to pick and choose which of his HQs are going to be in supply. And to do so, we need to spend supply points. I have not used any NATO operational air to attack the Warsaw Pact supply line. So, they have as much supply as they can hope to get every turn. I think they're going to continue to get 2 supply points every turn. So we actually have built up a decent stockpile, but where in turns 1 through 7, I had free reign to just have my HQs in supply via line of supply and tracing and just execution. Now I have to worry about actually sending them supplies and being picky and choosy. And what this means is for every HQ that is trying to provide both movement and combat supply to units that are outside home countries, which, I mean, to be honest, that's most of the Warsaw Pact forces right now, right? Because the Soviets are not East German, rather. And the Polish units are not in Poland, and everything. Like, all these units are in enemy territory just about as we push against the NATO forces. To keep them in supply and to keep them from being marked out of supply, my entire army, um, the HQ has to have a supply point spent for it. Even if that HQ is in friendly territory, so Southeast German Front HQ is here, if I don't spend the point, right, we would put a HQ out of supply marker on him, which means he can't provide supply to all these units here because they're in enemy territory, which means this entire front is out of combat supply, or would be out of combat supply when they need to trace for it after using their uh, allotted supply that they have with them right now. So if I look at the map, it basically means if I want to keep a front from being debilitated, I need to spend an HQ on each front. Um, and when I look at it, I mean, let's ignore the Copenhagen one for a second and just say those guys are or whatever. Um, Baltic front, I don't want to lose out there, so I may need to figure out what I want to do. But the even if I skip the Baltic front, I'd have one, two, three, four HQs I'd want to keep supplied. I only get two every turn, so I'm net losing two. Um, how long would that last for? Well, that would last nearly the rest of the game, actually, with the 8 turns, um, or I'm sorry, 7 turns left. So never mind. It's actually not that big a deal. I think that's another opportunity for NATO. Had they been sending their few operational strikes to disrupt supply, this would be a bigger bottleneck on the Warsaw Pact. But because I focus NATO strikes in tactical ways, for the most part, or use those resources that way, the Warsaw Pact player has enough supply to more or less keep the drive going. But we have to pick a front to lose its love, and that's probably going to be the Baltic front, where I might need to swap it out on occasion. So that is something I need to think about. I don't want these guys to collapse and then have NATO, back in here for automatic victory. I gotta watch. I can maybe afford to do that here one time, over here maybe one time, but I need to make sure these two fronts stay supplied every turn because they're our main drive for victory, probably at this point. Now, alternatively, I could instead focus up here. But we're going to get a lot of time spent trying to clean up the British, so I still feel like this is our best bet for automatic victory. All right, 21 minute intro, guys. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot to talk about here, guys. This is a really good halftime sort of check in on this stuff. Um, there's a lot to think about. You hear me talking about this game, like there's these little intricacies and opportunity costs for not doing something, and maybe I should have done that other thing, and maybe that would have helped me in certain ways, or would have put more stress on the Warsaw Pact player than there already was, as NATO doing those supply strikes. And likewise, the Warsaw Pact player could have been using some of their effort in trying to knock down NATO air bases and reducing the NATO air points, which we've really not done. We can do that with chemical strikes as well. I think, but we haven't been doing that because I've been so focused on sort of the tactical air support, and of course, my weakness now being I've spread that out too thin. So a lot of mistakes made. We'll see how it goes. All right, I'm gonna go do turn 8. I'm probably gonna start chemical warfare, and we'll show where things have progressed. Okay, here we are at turn 8. Couple of things worth talking about. The chemical strikes aren't that great. They're kind of like having extra air points. Now, for Warsaw Pact, that's great because their chemical strikes are delivered via short range missiles or medium range missiles, it's described as. So there's no tax on our air points, and we use the operational chemical strike opportunity to actually deduct NATO tactical air points, which is one of the ways that NATO delivers their chemical strikes. So we were able to do that. That was pretty strong, very useful. Damaged some of the air points, cut them kind of in half for NATO, which meant that they did defensive strikes. The only chemical strike they could do in turn was to try to do a I forgot to mark it on the board. That's my bad. But they tried to fire something with an adjacent U.S. unit. The U.S. units have to deliver it, and they're not, wasn't very effective. So, all things considered, chemical weapons not having a huge effect right now. I mean, it's helpful to try to hit and disrupt some units to keep them from reinforcing. So that helped here. These guys were struck. They could only move 1 hex. They otherwise would have been rushing forward. So it helps with that. If they can hit far enough away and slow units down, it's useful. But we didn't quite see what we really needed to see out of it. There's kind of two important advances that occurred here. We had a combined Danish and British force that surrounded some of the Soviet units in the Baltic front and eliminated them. The HQ just got away, and so the Soviet position in the north is looking kind of tenuous from that perspective. Throughout the rest of the line, really just trying to form up better defensive lines that can hold for the moment. We did do, these French units are actually pretty beefy. And so we used them to great effect, actually. We did sort of a combined special operation. We had a number of American air units drop via both plane and helicopter behind enemy lines. I had left the Czechoslovakian HQ unprotected, and they jumped in and managed to avoid flak and interception and attack that HQ in clear terrain and remove them. So that was kind of a mistake on my part, leaving my jaw open. And they got hit, which means the Czechoslovakian front is effectively like not in good shape. They have no way to trace supply for at least 2 turns. That kind of shuts down this whole front for the moment and actually gives NATO the potential to disrupt and damage that front, or at least concentrate on defending against the Southeast German front. They're kind of doing fine. They're making advances, but it's slow. So this could actually be a big deal here. So the Baltic front effectively shut down, and now the Soviet player has to worry about an invasion of northern East Germany that could spell doom for the Warsaw Pact. And here, really, their Czechoslovakian momentum has just been shattered. I should have been watching out. I should have gone ahead and put a unit with the HQ, and I didn't do it. And so I'm looking at the map thinking, hey, I've got these 3 paratroopers I had put on the board. I needed to do something with them, air mobile units. I wanted to do something sneaky with them, and sure enough, that opportunity presented itself in a big way and was worth it, and we did it. Now they're out of combat supply, but the French are coming in to kind of help them out. If any Czechoslovakians attack, they're going to put themselves out of combat supply, which would only further weaken their position. So this is going to be a real pickle going into turn 9 for the Warsaw Pact player. Like, what can they do? They don't have a lot of options. That HQ is out for 2 turns. Um, their whole drive is shut, and they can't get combat supply. So anything they do, they're going to have to do very carefully, because it's going to leave them very susceptible to being attacked by these French units. So France about to turn into MVP here. If they can focus effort on, cleaning the clock, some of these Czechoslovakian units, that's going to provide tremendous amount of relief and maybe a French hook upward to basically put this game's, you know, coffin into shape, and a NATO victory. So, um, too little, too late, probably for the chemical strikes. Too little, too late for a lot of other advances. We did push back and managed to force NATO back in the north into clearer terrain. So there's a spark of hope that maybe the Northeast German front can try to make something happen there. But given they now have to protect their Baltic front flank, I'm doubting it. So what I may do here is play through turns 9 and 10 to see, rather than just do repeated little clips here, let a couple more turns go by, and we'll talk about kind of what happens after maybe 2 turns, just so that we're providing more commentary content here, over more of the game at a time. All right, here we are as we begin to head into turn 11. So really only 4 turns left. I played through turns 9 and 10. We definitely had the French push back the Czechoslovakians. Their HQ is back on the board, and that situation is starting to stabilize. The Czechoslovakians did have a nice counterpunch, but their situation is going to kind of get better. But it did buy us some time. There's been some push and pull here. The line is getting really thin, and we're only a couple hexes away. So this slow kind of grind, we're still seeing some success, but it's at the cost elsewhere. So we're still, um, what may happen is we shift downward. We can continue the Southeast Germans to push through this spot, which is looking mighty thin. We might even have to pull back other units to salvage it, or get these Americans swung up this way. They keep getting hit with chemical strikes, so they're getting slowed down. Um, and then we shift the Polish front down to kind of help break open the path here.
because it's really not hard for the HQ to move up if we count from Erfurt to the HQ and then the units to get over the river. It's really not that hard of a supply situation. We just need to burst through. We've got basically 4 turns to do it. Now, the big kind of upset that just occurred is a British jaunt. Since they've been left kind of their own devices and free to operate, they swung around this way and actually disrupted the Northeast German Front HQ. So the Northeast German Front, they also got hit with a chemical strike from the U.S. unit nearby. Um, the one we were able to get off, and that was helpful with an organic capability. But the Northeast German front, even the Baltic front, is kind of frozen. There's not much, there's too much risk trying to attack. At this point, we want to be on the defensive up north, and the Allies, or NATO, I should say, is kind of into a good position. Now, these units still have combat supply for the moment, but they're going to have a hard time keeping up. That intervening turn where the HQ is not available is definitely going to hurt their situation because they're surrounded by Zox right now. So if the Allies can kind of get into a better position or save up some airstrikes, they could eliminate those guys. But all their airstrikes are going to be needed to slow down the Soviets down here. So it's more of an opportunistic play. It's to make sure there's no other obvious breakouts that could occur, so that we have a greater chance of shifting down if we need to in these last couple of turns. If we have to pull French back, we'll do that. I mean, we'll do whatever it takes to try to hold the line for a few more turns. Um, the supply expenditure has been high for the Warsaw Pact, so they've only got a few turns left of like good supply at this point, and what could happen is that these guys run out of steam. So it's funny how close we are. It's like right here. This is the game right there. There's a handful of German units and French units I'm putting in. We can cycle off other units, but we can't quite give up an entire front because we don't want to give a fast mover the opportunity to race out here. So it's touch and go. I think I'm going to play through turns 11 and 12 before I cut back in and just see have we gotten any major significant changes. I think NATO probably wants to try to pull back a little bit and see if they can just hold for a few more turns, outlast the Warsaw Pact supply. All those are factors right now. And now that the Czechoslovakian front is kind of back and active, that is a worry. They could do some significant damage um, over time. And I did forget, so I accidentally took that off the map. That's my mistake. Um, though Nuremberg was recaptured by the French, so it's all tough going. There is a pathway to victory for the Warsaw Pact, but it is very narrow. It's worth playing through, so it's still interesting, though I'm thinking maybe NATO's going to come away with a victory here. We're going to have to see. Um, so, yeah. Uh, yeah. We'll come back after the end of turn 12 and see if there's any gas left in the tank. Okay, here we are at the end of turn 12, I think. I think I took care of everything I could and wanted to. The NATO forces are on the general retreat, pulling back to try to hold a defensive line just to outlast the next 2 turns. The Polish front is actually doing reasonably well pushing. They're still several hexes away from the Rhine, so I don't know that they're going to do much, but what they are doing is um, keeping those units here from just trying to smush in there, and it's kind of chaotic, right? They're just rushing. NATO's rushing men in between the spearhead of the Southeast German front, um, and you figure it's two, three, 1, 2, 3 hexes away. And I don't know that they're going to be able to do it. I think they're pushing, trying to use their airstrikes. NATO got the better airstrikes this last turn, so you can see there's some hits and disruptions. Um, in the south, NATO forces are trying to spread out to make sure the Czechoslovakians can't make a mad dash. So just trying to protect, all through here. Sorry, it's hard for you guys to see. all through the bottom here of the map, there's cities, and we're trying to cover the hexes that don't have cities. They're not much to defend there, but at least they can't walk over the river. And we've got units with Zocs and everything else here to just slow them down. It's coming down a little bit to the wire. I can still see where it would be very difficult for Warsaw to achieve what they need to achieve. The Northeast German front is kind of back in action now with their HQ back, but they've really, it's sort of become this weird no man's land where the critical fighting is all down here, and we're not willing to do too much other than make sure that we can continue to try to slide down and not leave any openings. Um, so I could be, playing poorly in some areas. I'm sure that's the case. There's a lot more chemical strikes as we're trying to use them as disrupting locations. Hard to get any uh, units through certain bottlenecks as we've been going. Some persistent chemical strikes, some not. What that means is like these are persistent. They remain, there potentially turn after turn. These go away immediately. So you want to use the non-persistent if you plan on moving your units through that area. You want persistent if you want it to be a blocking element. So we're trying to slow down reinforcements from getting to this critical uh, spearhead point here. So I mean, right now I'm gonna say Warsaw Pack's probably not gonna make it, but I'm willing to try to find out like you know how how far can we go? Can we get it through? One good attack here or there, we could see us, right here. Maybe not quite enough to make it through. I think we're starting to lose our units cohesion. Um, so probably not going to make it, but it's worthwhile. Two more turns. Turns 13 and 14 remain. Again, it's going to be a NATO victory if Warsaw can't make it over. I mean, you can kind of look at the situation here. There's a lot of kind of open gaps, strategically placed gaps. The Warsaw Pack's almost out of supply. They've got enough to maybe get them through these last couple of turns before they go bone dry. That would obviously be an issue. And I guess if you're trying to track the narrative here, I mean, if the Warsaw Pact armies are this banged up, they didn't quite get across the Rhine. They've taken seized parts of Germany certainly, but now they're kind of out of supply. Puts them in a precarious position. And I don't know what else happens from there. Um, you can try to figure that out after the fact or wait for you know I really don't know. I don't know what the narrative would be here. I mean, I think the Warsaw Pact's doing reasonably well, pushing the Allies around, but I think over the long haul, if they don't have any supply, they run out of munitions, things start to degrade, and NATO's probably got the upper hand over the long haul. So, all right, I'm going to play through turns 13 and 14, and that's going to wrap up the campaign. Again, we're going to try to make some last ditch efforts, both sides, at the critical point of Mons. Basically, is this area that is the critical sector that's going to make or break it. Belgians are doing what they can to get in there and support. Germans are rushing in there. Americans, French, all in the gap to hold the line as long as they can. And we'll see when I come back the end of the campaign. I'm just going to play through turns 13, 14, finish this off. Okay, guys, here we are at the end. Technically, this is the end of turn 13, and for turn 14, I was looking at it thinking, okay, is there any mathematical way for us to get there and have it work, and even under the absolute best conditions that I can figure out? Um, and I'm looking one more time. Like if this would kind of, just to game it out here, guys, just to see, it would be like pull this guy back. He goes in a reserve. These guys, let's say he would recover from that. We smash this guy, advance after combat. He would get released to go. Let's say we rolled a 6, eliminated him. he would need to go. Well, he's only got 5 movement. You know, 1, 2, 3, and that's not enough. Um, we'd have a penetration there, and then basically, I mean, if we took, I don't even know if I've got anybody left at this point. I'm like looking around, like, do I have any paratroopers that would trace supply to the SEGF? Like, no, I don't think so. Not anymore. Um, they're all dead. Uh, maybe if we had a paratrooper left, we'd land here, and then we'd trace. There's no Zoc in that hex. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then like that would be. But the NATO player would have the ability to, really on their turn, they would just pull back and attack that unit and remove it, and then that'd be the end of the game. There's just no mathematic way that I can see that would that would do it. Now, somebody might look at this later on and like figure out some miracle way that it could maybe work. But I don't think so. I mean, let me double check. I didn't check what the air would be. So yeah, we'd have some air. So maybe, I mean, let's roll for this unit that I set aside. Would we have killed him? No. Um, he actually, that was only a 2, so he wouldn't even have been. Yeah. So just, rolling the dice for the situations that matter. The Warsaw Pact did not get in to the Rhine, did not get across the Rhine. Again, if they did, there's sort of a last opportunity um, for the NATO forces to try to get rid of that unit that gets across, and they would have some options like nukes or whatever to try to clear it. So I mean, just to kind of restore the game state here a little bit. Um, all things considered, like that. This guy was here. It's not bad. I mean, if we look at the like, whatever we could have done this last turn, we would have maybe taken another hex. We'd have been 1 or 2 hexes away from an automatic victory. I'm pretty pleased with the end result here. Like, okay, as we discussed at the beginning of the video, like there were things. Had I just understood the situation a little bit better, I might have been able to pull this off if I had really dedicated myself to how I wanted to approach this and like really concentrated my strike capability in this sector more than I did initially. I could easily have seen us grabbing this one. So while we are at the end of this playthrough, I'm just going to call it here. There's no mathematic way to make progress in this last turn. I'm pretty pleased with the result. There were tense moments throughout the 14 turns. At various points, it really seemed like the Soviets were close to making a big breakthrough that was going to be a game ender. Mad scramble of NATO forces to block that, strategic movement to try to lay out some defenders. Um, and we were basically bottoming out on our supply as the Soviets. We would have had 3 supply points to work with, or 4 supply points. I'm sorry, 4 supply points, which would have been enough. We get so many a turn, we'd be able to make that work, but probably at least keep the drive alive. Um, but same thing over here. I'm trying to see like, would there have been any Czechoslovakian path to victory? These guys move too slow for it to have gotten us all the way to here, which is really where they would have been able to reach. Yeah, I mean, it's all, when I look at the game state, I say it's conceivable the Warsaw Pact could have won. It didn't go that way. Die rolls had a factor, concentration of effort had a factor. I definitely think had I had a little bit more focus on how to execute um, and concentrated on these 2 sectors to maybe the detriment of the other sectors, like maybe we'd be looking at a Warsaw victory. We didn't get it, but I don't feel like this was a one-sided affair. Like I screwed up the War of Nerves scenario. So this is, I think, a much more real playthrough of what the game system can give you when you're playing a little more intelligently. Just maybe not optimally. So I didn't get exactly where I wanted to be.
as the Warsaw Pact, but this was still a pretty good run. Like I'm pretty pleased with the playthrough. You can see, I mean, just by comparison here, like we are, we've pushed into Germany. We've bypassed some of these cities in the late game just because there is no solid opportunity to make something of it. But we've pushed pretty far into West Germany down in this sector, right? I mean, we've pushed again. We bypassed some cities, realizing that we didn't necessarily need to do it. Granted, they're not getting the victory points for this. If we were to look at the victory points, it's nowhere near the Warsaw Pact victory. Um, Even try, we don't get victory points for these guys. They are way fine in terms of supply. We're not cutting off their supply path. So they're not any victory points really for the Soviets. But we made a lot of progress, right? And you look at the Fulda Gap. I mean, I think the Warsaw Pact, kind of won the Fulda Gap itself, but didn't have enough oomph to get it all the way through Frankfurt and Mons to achieve victory. So um, that was all goodness. I'm pleased. So I want to kind of do a quick sort of post mortem. I'm not going to do a separate post mortem video. I think the next thing I want to focus on is the review to come. Um, I think we talked a lot about what I would cover in a post-mortem earlier in the video up front. There's definitely in this strategic surprise scenario a need to focus effort on a critical point. You could think of this like in the context of OCS, where in OCS you're building up supply, you're building up effort, and you're focusing on one particular area to make your breakthrough. I think a similar mentality here as the Warsaw Pact is what is needed, at least for strategic surprise. Again, I think the extended buildup scenario could provide a different situation. You're dealing with maybe more units that could make a big difference. Here, we just didn't see enough ground to do a broad front approach, and a broad front approach will lose you the game pretty handily. A focused effort approach and trying to beeline to some selected sector, pick your sector, and there's pros and cons to each one, but pick your sector and go for it. In the south here, like, and we'll call this, from here downward, the south. From here downward, you're closer. The front line is closer to the Rhine than any other point, but the terrain is difficult, and the Americans are here, and they've got their HQ support. They've got helicopters. They're gonna. It's gonna be a tough fight, but you're basically hedging the distance as your advantage, the units and terrain the disadvantage. Up north, which we could have easily have seen a different focus, right? Kind of never push too hard into Denmark, other than creating our own defensive line right here and then pushing through here. Well, there's still units here, not as many Americans, so there's not as much support or even helicopter support. If you push through, if you manage to get through the initial area here, you're dealing with a lot of other units like the Dutch and the British and West Germans, but it's more easy to get them into this clear terrain where your big beefy units are going to be much more effective. You're not losing a column shift all the time because of terrain. You're going to have a much easier time knocking those units out, hitting them with air support because they're not in good terrain, so you don't get the -1 to your strike die rolls. And then your advantage is it's greater distance, but you maybe have an easier time actually making your way through here. There's a couple of defensive lines, but generally, you only need to take one or two cities to extend your supply line, long enough to get a victory over here. I mean, you could even bypass these cities if you really wanted to. You make it to this hex, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is where your HQ is. You count back to maybe you've taken Bremen, and then from Bremen to Schwerin is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hexes for your line of supply. So long as you don't have any NATO units giving you grief, like that's all the supply link you need. You cut a swath, you break these guys out, and you make a dash over here, a couple of units, however you want to look at it. And it would be very hard because you still want to be pushing to some degree or maintaining a line over here. Um,
It's not like all these units can suddenly shift north. You're going to really kind of have knocked them off balance if you made the cut. And I didn't do that. I didn't focus on the north. I focused on the south. It'd be interesting to see how that compares. If someone's done very well in the north, what that looks like. Is it hard to get over the Vesser, or how do you do that? I don't think there's enough session reports on Board Game Geek or otherwise that to really have a good feel for what that looks like. But maybe in time, folks will play more of this game. I know it competes with other Third World War hypotheticals, but I've generally been pleased with the experience here. I think this has been a good game, a good game experience. I think you could definitely play this multiplayer with different players in command of different parts of the front. Um, it plays pretty quick once you get rolling, which is nice. So, assuming you get over the hump of learning the game, it's not that hard to get it set up and start playing, and you can knock out a scenario. I bet you could knock out, honestly, if you had the opportunity, you could sit down and knock out a 14 turn scenario that maybe ends earlier than 14 turns in like a day of gaming, which is nice. A day, one good solid day, you can experience the game, war of nerves or otherwise, and that's nice. So, all right, guys, that's it for this video. That's it. NATO won, but just by a hair. A handful of miles separating the Soviets from France, or at least the other side of the Rhine. Um, we'll start getting ready for the review video, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. Hope you enjoyed this video and the commentary within. We'll see you in the next one, guys. Take care. Keep gaming.